Welcome everyone to the RCI GDAS webinar. Today Gail Austin will be presenting Program Essentials, Staff Selection, Training, and Adaptation. Before we get started, let's cover a few conference details. If you have a question during the conference, you can type the question at the bottom left in the chat section, or you can raise your hand. All questions will be answered at the end of the conference. Also, if you're at your own computer station, at the end, a post-test survey will pop up. There will be 5 questions about the training. And there will be quite personal questions like, what is your name and your email address, so that I can send you your certificate. If you're not at your own computer, please pay attention to the last slide, write down the web address, and go to your own computer and take the post-test. I'll be sending out certificates within 1 week of this seminar. And I'd like to introduce Gail Austin from the Rosalind Carter Institute for Caregiving.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for having me here today. I love sharing the lessons I've learned out in the field about evidence-based implementation, and I look forward to sharing this information with those of you who are joining us today. I hear you can barely hear me. Okay, I'm going to see if this is that any better? Amy? A little. Okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to pick up the phone and take you off speakerphone, and I don't lose you. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right, now what I'll do is mute everybody else, and then we'll take you off mute later when we have our question and answer period. Okay.
The conference has been muted.
Let's begin. We have a lot to cover today, but before I start getting into the meat of it, I want to give y'all an idea of who I am and why I think I might know a little bit about evidence-based implementation. I'm certainly no expert. I'm still learning. But I have had some experience over the past few years. I have been working with 7 area agencies on aging to implement 3 evidence-based caregiver interventions around the state of Georgia. I've had the great privilege of working with the principal investigators of the REACH VA, the New York University Caregiver Intervention, and Care Consultation Interventions, as we have translated them to community agencies. And I've also been trained as an interventionist in those interventions as well as care transitions, and I'm a master trainer in RCI REACH and Savvy Caregiver. So I've been pretty much submerged in evidence-based interventions and evidence-based implementation, and it's a great field, and I'm enjoying that work very much. The AAAs that I've been working with, I've had the privilege to work with Coastal Georgia, Southern Crescent, Northeast Georgia, and then with the wonderful Cindy Holloway, I've been working with the Atlanta Regional Commission, Legacy Link, and Heart of Georgia. It's been a great experience. I've really enjoyed getting to know the directors and the staff at the AAAs. I look forward to continuing opportunities for us to work together in the future. Now, I've learned some things about AAAs over the past few years, and one is that y'all are a busy bunch of folks. Seems like most people are doing the work of at least 2 people, because basically every now and then a mandate will come down that y'all are supposed to implement a program, but there's no funding attached to it. So that just means that work has to go on somebody's already full plate. Actually, my office looks a lot like that picture, so I think y'all aren't the only ones that are busy. I've also had the directors and the staff people share some of the frustrations that they experience when they're implementing new programs, such as if there's no funding attached and you can't hire new staff, you have to locate that person who is capable and willing to take on this additional work. Most times the training is either just a one-shot event, a day's training, or even less. And sometimes it's just you get a manual and you're told that this is what we're going to implement here. So it's just a handoff of a manual, which is frustrating for you guys, I know. Also, they're just like in every other environment, AAAs are no exception. Sometimes there are political influences on who you hire. There are budget constraints, and also there's a restricted labor pool. So your selection is not always as great as you would like. But the great news that I've learned is that most people, in fact I would say the vast majority of people who work in the AAAs truly care about the clients that they're serving. They're dedicated to the work they do. They're bright and they're creative. They're creative in that they can get so much done, so many services out to those clients without additional funds. And they're delightful to work with. In fact, they're a downright fun bunch of folks, and I've really enjoyed the time I've spent with them. A few years ago, when we started talking about implementing evidence-based caregiver interventions around the Rosalind Carter Institute and started doing a little bit of homework about that, we found out it's not just the interventions that will have protocols and fidelity that you need to adhere to, but there's actually strategies and tools that have been proven to be successful in the implementation of evidence-based interventions. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about evidence-based implementation of evidence-based interventions. So it's a second level of prescribed activities and tools and strategies that you use to bring around those desired outcomes. We have been working with a National Implementation Research Network. We refer to them as NIRN. Dean Fixen, Karen Blase, and their colleagues are really leading the field in evidence-based implementation. They have worked with a number of different populations, and in their work they have designed these implementation drivers model. And these drivers have been proven practices that render the good outcomes that you need, and it leads to high fidelity. We found that this is a very useful model that we use in the implementation of our caregiver interventions as well. As we're moving through these slides, I want you to note that when I refer to interventionist or practitioner, that is indeed the same person. This is the person who is responsible for delivery of the intervention in the field. Don't let this diagram scare you. We're not going to be covering all of these drivers today, but I did want you to see that the full package of drivers that have been described by the NIRN model. And note that these are considered integrated and compensatory, meaning that they all kind of dovetail. There's some overlap between the different drivers. And also that if you have a weakness in one driver, you can oftentimes compensate for that weakness by a strength in another. We found out that the work of implementation can be difficult for a number of reasons. One is that changing the behavior of adult human service professionals is hard. That's kind of a silly statement because changing the behavior of any human being is difficult. I mean, you can tell that by the diet industry, billions of dollars people spend trying to change their eating behaviors. It also requires a systematic approach from not just the practitioners, but also administrators and policymakers in making that transition to evidence-based implementation. I'm sorry, I've been distracted by people saying they can't hear. Do I need to put that number back in again? Okay, I'm going to let Lisa do that while I continue with my presentation. Sorry about that. And it also requires the application of those implementation drivers that I talked about. Now, why are we so focused on the human services practitioner or the interventionist? Why do we go to such lengths to make sure we have the right person in that job? Because indeed, as far as the general population, the people that are being served by these programs are concerned, the practitioner is the intervention. In fact, in many cases, the practitioner is the face of the agency. So being able to put that right person in the job is critical to successful implementation. So what kind of staff behaviors are we talking about changing? Well, case management is a very important service provided by the agencies in the community. However, most evidence-based interventions take a more coaching approach. They are an empowerment model, which means that their focus is to give the clients the tools and the understanding that they need so that they'll be self-sufficient in addressing problems that come up after the program is over. So we're not dissing case management. There is a role for case management, and it is indeed very important. But the coaching piece is more in line with the goals of the evidence-based interventions. Also, there is a set of protocols, procedures that must be followed, and some people have a very difficult time sticking to a protocol. We found that sometimes it's the person who looks best on paper, the person with the most experience and the most knowledge, has the most difficulty adhering to a protocol that might not agree with what they feel is the best way to deliver these interventions, and therefore that does not make them a good fit for this position. Also, the collection and use of data. For some people, they don't agree that it's valuable, or it's just not their thing, and they think it's too tedious, and they end up either not collecting the data as accurately as we need, or they have not they don't collect all of the data that we need. And indeed, if it's inaccurate or if it's incomplete, it might as well be no data. So you need to be sure you're going to find the person that's going to comply with the comprehensive completion of all the pieces of data that you need to be sure that you're delivering this intervention with fidelity. And we really do require the entire agency to feel like they have ownership of these interventions. We want them, from the receptionist through the director, we want everybody to understand what role they play in making this a successful intervention. We want them to feel excited about the intervention. I like to think of I know that I do this and some other people do. If you're in the line at the grocery store and you hear people talking about something that makes you understand that they could use the intervention, that you feel compelled to share it with them. They're that excited about it. So in order to have that level of enthusiasm from the entire staff, you want to engage them throughout the entire process as you're implementing an intervention. Indeed, the ingredients to teamwork, of course there are many, but the two that I'm highlighting are transparency in decision-making and inclusion in decision-making. Now, you can't always include all your staff in making some of the decisions about what implementation what intervention to implement, or some of the big decisions. And if that's the case, then you want to be transparent about who is making the decisions, why was this one made, what's the background behind the decisions that have been made. And then whenever possible, of course, you do want to include your staff in the decision-making process. I do want to warn you that if you ask for input and for whatever reason don't use that input, it's always good to explain why. Because everybody likes to feel heard, and if they continue to offer input and they don't feel like it was being considered, if they don't understand why it wasn't used, then they just might withdraw and not participate in providing that input later down the road, and you don't want that to happen. We'll begin by a discussion of the recruitment and selection driver of our evidence-based implementation. Implementation best practices would include that you set your expectations, that you screen for prerequisites, select for the unteachables. Those three I'll be going into a little more depth. And then you allow for mutual selection. And the important piece about mutual selection is that you don't sugarcoat it. You want to make sure that not only you think that this employee is going to be a good fit, but they think so as well. So you really spend the time to tell them the good, the bad, and the ugly about what their role will be, because there's always some good and bad in any new position and any new job that people take on. You don't want them to find halfway after they've been trained that there's this piece of it that's really not good for them. So exploring all pieces of it is good. Okay, I have been told by Lisa that we are having some technical difficulties. She's typing in a message so that people will have the information they need to log on. Set expectations. Probably the first thing that you want to do is really sit down and draft a thorough job description that lists all the accountability, all your expectations. For instance, with our Georgia Reach interventionist job descriptions, we put in there that we required them to achieve certification within a certain amount of time after they were hired, and that they must deliver the intervention with fidelity. Having that in the job description, which is in their possession even prior to that first interview, demonstrates to them that this is an important piece of what your job's going to be, and we expect it to take place. When you're going through the selection process, you will screen for prerequisites. Prerequisites being those things that they must have. You don't even get called in for an interview if you can't demonstrate that you have the prerequisites that are in place for this position. Then once you're interviewing your candidates, you select for those things that you can't teach them. They have to bring those things to the table. It's something that you would not be able to teach them, like compassion or enthusiasm or being detail-oriented. They either have those or they don't. Chances are you're not going to be able to train those particular traits into them. So think about the unteachables that they need to deliver the intervention with fidelity. You need to do your homework. Identify those skills and knowledge and abilities, and involve the staff whenever possible, because it's actually a really good brainstorming exercise. It forces people to really gain a clear understanding of what is needed to successfully deliver the intervention. Just expands everybody's knowledge base on the intervention, and it's a good roundtable discussion. Now, I understand that there's a good chance that many of you will be involved in a matter of balance, which is an evidence-based intervention that they're looking at disseminating around the state of Georgia. So I went to the website and I pulled this information down, and this tells us clearly what we need to look for in someone that we would hire to carry out this program. So I took those things that were identified as needed to be a good matter of balance interventionist practitioner, and I did a little brainstorming of my own, and I came up with a list of the prerequisites and the unteachables that they might need to have in order to do this job. Of course, this is just, I'm sure y'all could come up with quite a few, but I just wanted to show you the process of carrying this exercise out. And I'm sorry, I'm a little distracted by people having problems, and I apologize for those who are having problems with the webinar. So you can see, if someone's going to recruit and train volunteers, then a prerequisite would be experience in recruitment and retention of volunteers and experience in training adults. If they need to coordinate the program, what kind of things do you need to know or be able to do in order to be good at coordinating a program in your community? Well, they're going to need good time management, organizational skills. It'd be great if they had contacts in the community, so they'd be able to line up the training sites that would be hopefully free. And they must be detail-oriented and thorough. You don't want your class to show up for a session and it's not be in place, or there are no chairs, or the things that you need to carry out the meeting aren't there. In marketing the program, I want to make sure that they have good writing skills, that they're good at creating brochures, that they don't mind getting up in front of a group of strangers and speaking, and also that they're motivating and they have an engaging personality. It's that likability that you're looking for, because they'll be interacting with people they don't know, and they need to be able to engage them. And finally, they'll need to be able to evaluate outcomes. You want to know, have you ever had any experience in program evaluation? And do you believe in the value of accurate data? This is getting back to that piece where people need to like data. You take that brainstorming session and you turn this into this tool that we use during our actual interviews, where we score the people 1 to 5, 1 being not so great, 5 being fabulous, in each of these areas. And that helps you quantify the people you select to be an interventionist. Now, when you're looking at your prerequisites, you're going to list the prerequisites in your job announcement. I would say that means you probably won't get people that don't have them, but what I found is people will put in their resumes even when they have absolutely no qualifications. But that's how you're going to screen out the people who really are not even going to make it all the way to the interview. Now, the unteachables can be a little bit trickier. It really takes a lot of thought beforehand to come up with what kind of questions can you ask. And then also, there are other strategies and techniques that are part of evidence-based implementation that you can use to help you get at those unteachable traits that you're looking for. We like to use role-playing and behavioral vignettes. We find that they're a great way to find out what's somebody's natural inclination. When someone comes in and sits down at the table and you're about to interview them for the job, and you say, well, we got a few questions, and at the end of our questions we're going to have a little role play and have you demonstrate your abilities in this area. People usually get a little more nervous than usual, and we find that that's kind of a good indication of some personality traits we might be looking for. We will assess them for their ability to accept feedback, and then also for their ability to change their own behavior because of that feedback. Now, this takes some thinking, and I encourage you again to bring your staff together to come up with different ways in which to demonstrate people's mastery of skills or their ability to carry out the intervention. These are some of the things that we have used. We've taken just a few, maybe 10 questions out of the assessment, straight out of the intervention, and put them on a sheet by themselves. And then we have a person role play as a caregiver, and the potential practitioner will conduct the assessment. And afterwards, we give them some time alone with what was discussed during that assessment and ask them to summarize their findings. What do they feel would be a good care plan for this caregiver? What are the red flags that they identified during that assessment piece? And this is a 20 to 30-minute process. We give them some time before we do the role play. We give them the questions, give them time to get comfortable with the questions so that it's just not completely cold. And then we actually hold the role play, give them another 10 minutes to get their thoughts together and summarize their findings, and then we discuss it. And beforehand, we have prepared what we expected them to say when in their findings. We also, with matter of balance, these people will be teaching a class. You could have them demonstrate how they would teach an exercise to a staff member posing as a participant. So just like I said, take a snapshot of what you expect them to do in the intervention. It doesn't have to be long and drawn out, but it'll give you an idea of how comfortable they are. And again, one of the most critical things is that they can take your feedback and adjust their behavior accordingly. We also have them deliver a portion of a session to the caregiver. We provide it beforehand. We sit down with the person who's going to role play, and we tell them, this is what you need to, this is who you are, these are going to be your issues, and that person really becomes that caregiver so that when the candidate is conducting this mock session, we already know what they're going to find and what they should be making a note of. What do I do about hand raising?
I answered the question.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. We're still having some technical difficulties, and I apologize. Just so everybody knows, we will have this recorded and archived and available after the webinar. As I stated earlier, role plays do make people nervous, and this is when they show their fallback behaviors. I remember this is when it comes really clear the people who really feel more comfortable filling out forms and information and referral rather than the coaching piece, where they don't spend the time to make that connection. They immediately go to writing notes and asking those questions. And that's okay. There's a place for that, but the evidence-based interventions usually require someone who's more engaging, more willing to dig deeper and really address a problem-solving piece and the coaching piece rather than just conducting the assessment. Again, they don't need to be perfect. In fact, we'd be surprised if they were perfect. It does happen every now and then. But they need to be able to hear their constructive criticism and alter their performance when they're given another chance. And I'll tell you, be prepared to be surprised by what you learn from this experience. It has been a game changer for us more than once. We would go into the role play thinking that, oh, this candidate is absolutely the one we need, and after the role play we'll go, oh my goodness, thank goodness we did that, so now we can see that they just really don't have the skills we need. And vice versa. We've had people that might not have done so well during the question part of the interview, but yet when we held the role play, they were just a shining star. And we definitely wanted that person in the field representing our agency and doing this work for us. So it can be a big piece of the decision-making process, and it's hard to do, and I'm not going to say that all of our sites have done that since we've started the implementation process. We certainly recommend it and hope that they will, and RCI always uses these strategies when we're making those kinds of hiring decisions because we've just found it to be so helpful. Pre-service and in-service training. Pre-service training should really include the background information, the theory, philosophy, and values of the intervention. We not only want to introduce the components and key practices, but the reasons behind what they're doing and why. If you're like me, I like to know why I do the things I do, and then it makes a lot more sense, and I tend to adhere to things better that way. When it comes down to the provide opportunities to practice new skills and receive feedback in a safe training environment, yep, you guessed it. We're pulling out our role plays again. Role playing should be a big piece of the pre-service training for a couple of reasons. One is that, you know, we can know intellectually that, yeah, I can do this. This makes perfect sense. I know exactly. But then when you sit down with a caregiver and you're about to open your mouth and say something to them, if you have not rehearsed this at all or had this opportunity for role play, it can be intimidating and you kind of get stopped in your tracks. So the role plays during the training are very, very important. And also, it's much better to give someone the feedback at this point in time. It's a safe environment. We're all friends here, than having to do that kind of feedback or correction after they're in the field. Most people consider in-service training to be those people that you bring in during staff meetings that give you a presentation. But when we speak of in-service training, we're really talking about observations of the delivery of the service in the field. And you can really do that several ways. You can do it by direct observation. The supervisor can shadow the interventionist perhaps on a session. That may or may not be a reasonable thing to do. So if that is not your preferred method, we found that audio taping, we really haven't done videotaping. We've usually used audio taping of service delivery so that someone can listen in and you have your fidelity checklist there with you, and you know exactly what that intervention should be doing out in the field. So you can listen to the audio tape, check off your fidelity checklist, and just understand exactly what the challenges might be, what the strengths are. And remember, it's so much easier to provide course correction early in the process than find out much later that there was a problem that needed to be addressed, and now you have X number of clients that have not really received the intervention the way you thought they had. You don't want to find yourself in that boat. So finding a way for direct observation or audio taping is absolutely a way to avoid that problem. Now, we have found that caregivers are really very open to being taped, audio taped. Haven't had a situation where they've just said absolutely no. Of course, it's important to let them know in the very beginning, this is completely okay. If you're uncomfortable with that, that's no problem. But we just offer them this opportunity to be part of the quality assurance for the program. And they generally understand that. And soon after the session has begun, from what I hear, and from what I hear when I listen to the tapes, they forget it's there and they go on about their business, and it's perfectly okay. In order to provide the best possible training, in order to provide the best possible coaching consultation during the delivery of services, the supervisor really should have participated in the training. We strongly recommend that. All of us, our staff at RCI, attends the training that is provided for interventionists. There's a very good reason for that, is that if you really gain such a good hands-on understanding of what should be happening out in the field when you go through that step-by-step training that's provided to the interventionist. It's also extremely helpful to have interaction with people who have done the intervention before. We've been fortunate in that we have been able to work with some of the original researchers, and we can go back to them for consultation. If we're experiencing some problems in the field, we'll go back to them and ask, this is going on, can you tell us what we should do about it? It's been very helpful. You might not be able to do that, but you could find people, other agencies that have implemented the same program, and they would be able to give you that hands-on experience as well. Supervising and coaching, that's a bit of what we've been talking about. We've already discussed the in-service training, the observation of people in the field, giving them feedback, giving them opportunity for course correction early on. But you should also have a structured supervision service delivery plan. And that plan should include a lot of opportunities for feedback from the people in the field. They are our eyes and ears out there. They can tell us what's working, what's not, what are our challenges, what are our strengths. And these kinds of things are what give us that opportunity to get that information back. We have regularly scheduled meetings that should be considered sacred. Now, it's very easy to come up with reasons not to hold a meeting, and I'm probably the master of that. I can always come up with a reason. But I have learned the hard way that these regular meetings are critical. And the people at the table should be the interventionists, the team that's directly affiliated with the implementation. In our case, it would be the interventionist, the program manager, the data manager, people who are entering the data, anybody who's working on that, because each piece of that must come together. And these meetings are the time where we make sure that everybody's on the same page. There should be some time on your agenda for open discussion. And it's also, what we learned, it's a great opportunity for two-way learning. The interventionists and everybody's learning about ways to address problems they're finding or challenges they're finding. And as a program manager, I'm learning about what's going on out there in the field. And what I found out is that it's those offhand comments that they make that really are more telling than any report they're giving. So if you're just sitting there sharing and chatting and enjoying learning more about what's going on out in the field, you'll find out that there are these little things that come up that can be very telling and very helpful in making sure that everybody's on the same page and moving forward correctly with the intervention. Staff and volunteer performance and evaluation. And this is important because as you're evaluating the staff, you're also evaluating the drivers that have been in place, because you're finding out, did I select the right person for the job? If not, what do I need to change in order to make sure next time I will be able to identify this issue? And did we give the right training? Did we give enough training? Or did we cover all the topics that should have been covered before this person went out in the field? And then finally, is the coaching working? Are we supervising them effectively? So as you can see, by conducting your staff performance evaluation, you're actually evaluating the performance of all those different drivers. This slide pretty much restates what I just said, and I'm not sure why it's in here, but we're going to move past it. We've talked about transparency. It's important that people know what to expect. They need to know how they're going to be evaluated, why they're being evaluated in this way, when they're going to be evaluated. Just keep the process completely open so there are no surprises. You also use multiple inputs of data and information. You have your personal observation or your audio files that you've been listening to and following along with your fidelity checklists. You have a self-report. I like to interview the interventionists and ask them, how do you think you're doing? And this is also a really good time to get some feedback on what they think about the intervention itself. Or there's some changes you think should be made, or there are problems with the intervention that you feel could be corrected that would make it better. This is a time to really dig deep and get that. They're the experts. They're the ones out there doing it. Use that time to dig deep and learn more about how this translation is going. And also you have evaluation surveys, which are, most of the programs are going to have a questionnaire that will come back to the supervisor that will give the client an opportunity to evaluate how that interventionist did. And I've been very fortunate. The ones we have received have always been excellent. In fact, it's usually you feel like you're witnessing a love fest between the clients and the interventionists. But still, that's their opportunity, and because they know that the interventionists will never see it, we can feel comfortable that it's a good report on how they're doing out in the field. And as I said before, we are informing our other implementation drivers through this process so that we can know what we might do differently next time. When we go back to our example of matter of balance, we know that for the staff performance evaluation, drop down the review procedural data. For any intervention that you're implementing, you really need to be figuring out what are my process indicators that are going to tell me whether or not we are getting to where we need to get if this person is doing what they need to do. And in my opinion, some of those indicators for a matter of balance would be the number of volunteers recruited, the number of classes held, the number of attendees per class, how many people are showing up, how many people are dropping out, and then of course you'll have your class evaluation surveys. Now, the critical piece here is that you're looking for what I call outliers. There's going to be an average number. Could be, it could be that you would say, I have 25%. This interventionist has 25% of their people drop out after the second session. But you might look at the others, and that could be across the board. So you have to really look at the individual's data and across the site, and maybe even across several sites' data to find out, is this an interventionist problem, or is this something inherent to the intervention? And then you might want to get on the phone and talk to some other people if you find out that what's happening at your site is very different from what's happening at other sites. Adaptation is not a part of the NIRN model of evidence-based implementation, but it's a topic I wanted to talk about today because working out in the field, I've come to believe that people are very wary of adaptation of evidence-based interventions, and I can certainly understand why, because they've been told, implement this with fidelity no matter what. And that is absolutely true. We do want to implement it with fidelity to protocol. However, translation is all about adaptation. And we may find that with the population you serve, in the environment that you're working, you may need to make some adaptations to the intervention so that it will best serve and be more effective in those circumstances. But there are some rules to it. You don't want to mess with the intervention in the first year. You want to deliver it as is. You're out there, you're sticking to protocol, you're gathering data, you're documenting anecdotal information on how things are going for at least a year. If at the end of that year you have an adaptation that you would like to make, it really should be data-driven, meaning that you have quantifiable information that demonstrates why this adaptation is a good idea. And then you want to thoroughly discuss this adaptation with your full implementation team. You want to get everybody's input and make sure that it's agreed upon. I'll give you an example. We have telephone support groups with our REACH program. And we found out that there was a high percentage of people who, in their evaluations, this ranks the lowest on the helpful linear scale. They still thought they were helpful, but it got the lowest score in terms of this is helpful to me. Then we started having our interventionists discuss it with people, the caregivers, while they were out in the field, and the feedback we got was that, if there's just a lot of talking, we really don't have enough time for interaction, we'd really like it better if we could do that. And another data piece was that we were having some problems with attendance. So based on the data on attendance, the data from the survey saying that it's a low score, and the feedback we got from the interventionists, we decided to tweak the telephone support group by limiting the amount of time that the group leaders spent talking about the topic and opening up the amount of time that the caregivers had for interaction. And indeed, we did see some improvement in attendance and in feedback after having made that change. There we go. Oops, sorry. That's where I need to be. Now, every intervention has something known as core intervention components, and these are what appears to be essential to the success of the program. Core intervention components should not be eliminated, and that last bullet right there, that's a misstatement. Adaptations eliminating the core intervention components are not feasible. Core intervention components can be tweaked. Indeed, the caregiver support, the telephone support sessions were part of the core intervention components for REACH. We did not have the option to just eliminate them. No matter if nobody called in, I don't think that we could have eliminated it. However, we did have the option to tweak it based on the data and the ongoing discussion with our team. So let me just restate that. You should know what your core intervention components are so that you know what could be tweaked and what you might have the opportunity to eliminate. And finally, in summary, I'm just going to read this. Remember that the practitioner is the intervention. So who you put in those shoes is one of the most critical decisions you'll make in implementing the program. Evidence-based implementation does require more preparation. I call it front-loading. There's a lot more work to be done before you deliver that first unit of service. But that preparation will pay off in the end. Few people enjoy role plays. In fact, most people hate them. Do them anyway. You'll be glad you did once you have that experience. Holding regular team meetings is hard. Oh, is it hard? It's hard to carve that time out, but do it anyway. Again, I found firsthand that it's really a critical piece and really will save you some headaches down the road if you maintain that ongoing regular contact with all your team members, giving them the opportunity to share their experiences and to problem solve together. Adaptations come later. They're based on data, It must not, eliminate the core component, a core component. And evidence-based implementation practices will ensure that if there is a problem with the intervention, if you did not reach your projected outcomes, if you have used these evidence-based implementation practices, it won't be the fault of the agency. You'll have to look somewhere else to find out what the issue is. And I think that's important to be able to feel safe and secure knowing that you have done all you can to ensure the successful implementation of that evidence-based intervention. That concludes my presentation. I thank you for your attention. We're going to open the lines for questions. I'm unmuting you now.
The conference has been unmuted.
You can just say it or raise your hand. Any questions? Oh. Lisa wants me to read you the slide. If you're not at your own computer station, copy down the link below. In order to receive a certificate, each participant must take the post-test survey individually from your own computer. Once you've successfully completed the post-test, you will be sent a certificate by email within the week. If you're at your own computer, a link will pop up at the end of the training. No questions? Most of you know how to reach me. If you have anything comes up after this presentation, I will welcome your questions via email or phone.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Please stand by.